The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hello, and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. And DeSantis here with our board president, Mickey Kelly. Mickey, welcome back again.
Hi, Ann. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is such a great series. This is our 10 Saint series, and it's geared for families in crisis. And I have to give you that credit, Mickey, that you were the one that kind of came up with this idea of doing this series. And I think the more we think about it, I think you and I were talking about doing a part two. You know, we did this whole part one with 10 saints. We could do a whole nother part two. And I think there's plenty of saints for us to reflect on.
Oh, absolutely, Ann. And honestly, I think this our focus for this month actually has a special place in the heart of your oldest daughter because she actually got married on her feast day, and also, let alone too, she started dating her future husband around her feast day and got engaged on her feast day, and they had a very special promotion of the roses, of course, given the fact that she's known as the little flower saint. Yes, folks, we are talking about Saint Therese of Lisieux. Pardon my French.
It's exciting. You said it right.
Very
with my
exciting.
daughter. And I'll never forget when my daughter got engaged, which was on October 1st of 2021. That was a purposeful, idea of my son-in-law that he wanted to have the engagement on that date because he's a big fan of Saint Therese of Lisieux, and so is my daughter Elaine. And they already had decided that this is when we want to have our wedding. And so not only were they engaged on that date, but on October 1st of 2022, they had their wedding. And very beautifully, my daughter wore a crown, as Mickey alluded to, a crown with the flowers on her head, and a special prayer to Saint Therese of Lisieux. The priest mentioned it during the Mass. So such a wonderful, wonderful saint, a doctor of the church. It's not easy to become a doctor of the church. It really isn't. And the ironic thing about Saint Therese is that when she died at the age of 24, that the nuns in the Carmelite monastery, they looked at her as if to say, what was so special about her life? She seemed so ordinary, but that is where her virtue was, right? Her virtue was in the fact that she didn't make herself look to be more important than she needed to be. I mean, obviously, we're all important in the eyes of God, aren't we? But she was always about a life of service, right, Mickey? I mean, she was about a life of service. So let's talk about that.
Yes, and honestly, as we look at this episode, like I really see a parallel between Saint Therese and previously we also talked about Blessed Pierre Guido Frassati, and both of them actually they were pretty close to each other as far as when they existed, and another thing they had in common is that they died young. They were like in their early mid-20s. Yet they were a force to be reckoned with when it came to their devoutness with the Catholic faith. And Saint Therese, like, she was no exception to this. She was she's very powerful when it came to, being young and holy. And let's face it, she had trials in her life. She could have chosen to throw in the white flag, especially as a child. And also too, like, there's no question sooner or later, we're going to have an episode about her parents when we go down the road. And that they have written letters, time and time again. And they're actually, believe it or not, her parents, Louis and Zelly, they are the first canonized married couple in the Catholic Church. I don't know if anyone wants to fact check me on that one, but change my mind later. But honestly, and there's also cause for canonization for her sisters. So the buck that sainthood buck didn't stop with Saint Therese, let alone her parents, but there's also the other 4 children. But as you said, Anne, Saint Therese, like, she has dedicated a life of service. In fact, one of her famous quotes is, "Miss no single opportunity making some small sacrifice, here by a smiling look, there by a kindly word, always doing the smallest right, and doing it all for love."
That is beautiful. And think about, Mickey, how simple really that can be for all of us. I mean, people who go through challenging times, and I want to address our audience here, which we always do, the families and individuals in crisis. And of course, we know that crisis comes in so many different forms. But sometimes the best that we can give to people, which makes them feel the sense of belonging, love, and care, is to offer a smile. And that can mean the world to someone who does not have the support that they deserve. And unfortunately, we do live in a world where so many people, either they don't have good family bonds, or there's some kind of distress in the family, argument, or they feel left out in some way, whether it be with family, friends, or otherwise. And we need to be Christ to them. And Therese knew that very, very well. Another quote of hers says that Jesus helped me to simplify my life by learning what you want me to be and by becoming that person. And think about that quote. I mean, that's a great one for people who are listening right now. And actually, it's good for me, you and I, Mickey, too, is that the key word there is to simplify my life. Think about the ways that all of us make our lives a lot more complicated than they need to be, when really the most important things are usually right in front of us. And what is that? That's our very life, which we owe to God. And the fact that we're living, breathing, moving, that we still have a life every day. We wake up in the morning and just thank God that we're there and able to serve and love others. And also the ability to be able to serve others. You know, many people come to us at the foundation, and even to me personally, and they're seeking healing, and healing is never, ever, I don't think, and maybe we can discuss this, it's never a once and done. Healing is something that is a continual thing throughout our lives. But I would say if there's any key to healing, obviously first is prayer, but second is really service. Because when we find that we can give ourselves back to others, that is our way of getting healing. And I believe that in this quote, when Therese says to simplify my life by learning what you want me to be and becoming that person, that is also another way to kind of look in the mirror and say, one way I can simplify my life is to serve. So let's talk about that. I mean, she was such a person of service. When she lived in the monastery with the other sisters in the cloister, she was constantly serving. And a lot of times she was serving people that were really difficult to be around. Let's talk about that.
Well, and honestly, I think one of the things we really have to understand is that Jesus said that we must do good to those who hate us. Now, let's not take it literally here. It's not just those that would like to ridicule us or say vile things or what have you. But I honestly think that what Saint Therese that she really was the illustration of what doing, good things to those who hate us is all about. And let's face it, I see it as a work of mercy when you do things to those who misunderstand you, those who, and let's face it, Saint Therese, like, she was ridiculed, she was mocked, and she had a hard time, getting along with with this. And granted, like, of all the places you would think, like, she would have an easy time when she was in the Carmelite monastery. But the reality is, there were some fellow sisters that were uptight towards her, that were insecure about themselves, especially insecure about, Saint Therese herself. And, it's kind of daunting, like thinking like, in our lives today, we probably have a coworker that we don't get along very well. But every now and again, maybe we want to help them out. Maybe they're struggling to complete the task. Maybe like, oh, you know what? I got some time on my hand. Maybe I help them. Maybe there's someone that there is a neighbor next door who maybe kind of like has polarized himself with this whole upheaval of our culture. Yet we take the time to maybe wish them, Merry Christmas, or we give them an extra like treats we have to them, or even like help them to bring in groceries or what have you. I mean, even Saint Therese reminds us that we must do small things. We were reminded that we have to do small things with great love.
Yeah, that's really the most important thing of all of this is, as Catholics, I mean, we've talked about this during other podcasts, but being well catechized and really understanding the faith and knowing your faith, living your faith, it's just so very, very important. And a lot of the reasons why people fall away from their faith is because they are not, and I put this in quotes because I've heard this so much, but they are not well catechized. But I do think, in my opinion, a humble opinion, that part of that being well catechized is not just that book knowledge of, say, the Ten Commandments and the Beatitudes and the Seven Sacraments and, the lives of the saints. I mean, these are all beautiful and wonderful things of what it means to be Catholic. But we can't forget that the lesson of Saint Therese of Lisieux wasn't just in knowing our faith. It was in practicing our faith. And in practicing our faith, I guess we never really want to become something that I read about one time in an article, something like a Catholic or a Christian police officer, meaning we're constantly looking and seeing the wrong things that other people do and praying for them to repent and so that they will live a better life. But we have to remember it's fine to pray for people. It's even fine to pray for their salvation. But the ways and means that Therese showed us how to do that was much different than handing someone a catechism or in praying lots and lots of novenas for someone to pray that they would repent. The way that she did it was to live it out toward them, right? So that is a lesson for all of us, that we need to put that into action. That's hard to do because the way that it happens for all of us is in daily life, isn't it? And another one of her quotes is to remember that nothing is small in the eyes of God. Do all that you do with love. So it's not so much when we're living out our faith, knowing and loving our faith is very, very important. But remember that really and truly, when we want to be disciples and imitating even a saint like Saint Therese, she lived it out. I mean, she wasn't the type of person that had to always have her opinion, have the last word in an argument. Let's talk about that, because that's a big way that she lived out her faith. She wasn't the type that if she had a disagreement with someone, that she had to make sure that she had that last say and make sure that she was right. As we hear over and over again, not just in the Catholic world, but in secular world, that it's better to love than it is to be right, isn't it? We can be right internally. We know that we're following the teachings of the church and that that's the quote, the right thing to do. But it's better to love others and live it than it is to prove to everyone how right we are about whatever topic that is. Let's talk about it.
Well, a couple of quotes kind of jumped out at me, Anne, that after what you just said. The first one that really jumped out, it also could talk about a previous point that you made. I now know that true charity consists in bearing all our neighbors' defects, not being surprised at their weaknesses, but edified at their smallest virtues. I think that really stands out to me. I think we also have to really understand some of the what stands out about people. I mean, it's great to judge them be fast to judge them just like that. I think another thing is Saint Therese. She understood what her vocation was in life, and I don't think we touched on this quite yet. Maybe a little bit, but one of her most profound quotes is, "Then, overcome by joy, I cried, 'Jesus, my love, at last I have found my vocation. My vocation is love. In the heart of the church, my mother, I will be love, and then I will be all things." So she understood that, it's one thing you're called to religious life, mass, the diaconate, religious, whatever. But it's another, but the main vocation of our lives is loving others. She understood this. I think both of those quotes really tell us that she understood what her purpose in life was. And it was more than just doing these things or overcoming, social adversity from her fellow sisters in the Carmelite monastery. She knew full well that her vocation was to be a vessel of God's love.
So beautiful. And when you were saying these words, it makes me think about even people that I know, whether it's someone who's gone before me or before us, or even somebody who might be even in my life right now, and people's personalities are interesting in many ways, aren't they? Because everybody has a certain charism. There are some people who are outgoing. There's some people who are more shy. There are some people who are a little more kind of internal in terms of what they share with others, and then others that are, very external. And even within those two facets, there's so much more to all of us, isn't there? And I do think that a lot of what she talks about, you picture almost in your mind that she's talking about being less talkative, better listener, less full of oneself. I don't always necessarily believe that what she's saying and what she kind of wrote about indicated that means that you have to become somebody that you're not. I don't think she's saying that if you happen to be a little more outgoing, that you need to tone back, that if you're too shy to speak up. I think what she's saying always is that whatever you do, do it with humility, right? So it doesn't mean you have to become somebody that you're not. Like, for instance, I mean, Mickey, you're a pretty outgoing guy, So I don't think that for you to become, or for me to become someone like Saint Therese, it doesn't mean that we need to change our personalities, right? I mean, it's more the way that we give ourselves to others. And I do think it involves being a good listener to someone, right? Because have you ever talked to someone where you really felt heard? I mean, they remembered what you said, they repeated it back. Next time they saw you, they asked you how your uncle so and so was doing, or how the family is, or they remembered little things about you. To me, that's really a big part of how we can do that in our like daily lives, and a way that we can reach out. And even to you, our audience that are listening, no matter what your circumstance can be so difficult, is that remember that's a small way that you can give of yourself, is just to, listen and care to the people around you. And another quote of Saint Therese is that to never tire of doing little things for others. Sometimes those little things occupy the biggest parts of their hearts. And I want to bring up something, Mickey, maybe we can even bring this up for discussion, is that when you think of the times that you've attended a funeral for someone that's passed, when you think about the relationship that you had with that person, a lot of times it's those little ways that they cared about you, isn't it? Right? The little ways that they were caring and loving, a good example, someone who loved God, someone who prayed for you and for others. So think about those virtues, because wouldn't you agree? I think when we examine ourselves and when we even examine the people who have gone before us, it is those gentle people, right? I don't think it necessarily means they have to be, as I said, introvert, extrovert. It's more the fact of where is the heart. So I didn't know if you wanted to say any words about those who have gone before us.
No, you're absolutely right about that one, Ann. And honestly, honestly, like there's so much we could say about Saint Therese, and I think about how, and I think you and I have talked about this from time to time. Like there are times like you ask me about, like a passing of like a relative or asking prayers for this or that. And I think honestly, that's the definition of like a true friendship. And I think it's important, if there's one thing you want to do in order to maintain a good friendship with people, is being that thoughtful gesture. Like they say something like, "Oh, I got this like job interview coming up," and then maybe a couple of days later you follow up with them like, "Oh, how did that interview go?" Things like that. You know, it makes it known that you're being thought of and people care about you. I think also too, and when I think about this, is that I always think of the gospel reading from John, which Jesus, goes to this well to get water. And this is like, we're talking like Samaritan, like, territory. And, Samaritan and Jews, they didn't get along very well, by the way, in ancient times. But that's the discussion we can have, for another day. And Jesus takes that time to talk to this woman who was going through so much. And I think, metamorphically speaking, that's what, good friendship is. Jesus took the time to like listen to her, and help her, where's wisdom? I mean, who knew? Maybe like down the road, like he probably saw her again, be like, oh, how'd it go? Things like that. And I think that's very important, that we have to like, show that we care about them. And I think it also is like an act of mercy towards another one. You see, in life, we're not judged by the degrees that we obtain, the money we make, the purchases that, you know, the purchases we also make. But I think what we as faithful Catholics must understand is that we are treated with the way we treated we're going to be judged by the way we treat others. And the times we spoke up for the truth, the times we were lackadaisical, or we didn't speak up enough, or we didn't stand up or fought harder. Those are the ways that we're going to be judged when we leave this earth. For Saint Therese, she knew full well that she was going to go through a lot of suffering, and it was a cross for her to bear. We too are going to have that calling ourselves. And truthfully, we must be willing to accept that call to suffer with God.
Very profound, everything that you just said. I almost feel like maybe somebody who's listening wants to kind of rewind that or go back and listen to what you said again. Because
well, they're welcome to do that, for
sure.
So
true. I mean, one of the things that you said, and I don't think, and this is just, I always say my humble opinion, as people say that, right? That in our Catholic faith, that we understand that enough, that the way that we treat the people in our lives, that I always say people past, present, and future when I say my prayers, because there's people that I've known from my past, there's people that I know right now, and there's people that I'm going to meet that I don't know yet, right? So when you say your prayers, I think of all those people, and not only do I say past, present, future, but I also say friends, family, indifferent, and I add enemies too, because I think we all have an enemy. I mean, it might not be somebody who's, hating you with a passion somewhere, although you never know, right? We could have that in our lives, right? Some people do, some of us do. But there's people who do, they're either indifferent or they don't care about us, or maybe they do have some hate for whatever reason. But I think that's a good way to pray. And I'm sure that Saint Therese probably did just about the same thing, because she cared a whole lot about people, and not just their salvation, but also the right now of it, right? I mean, we care not only about people getting to heaven, but we got to pray about how we and they get there, the journey that we take, right? Because it's not just the snap of a finger that we go get to heaven, right? It is a living, breathing thing that happens every day of our lives. It's a decision that we make when we wake up in the morning, and when we interact with somebody. It's a decision that I make when I'm having a conversation with someone where I want to give my opinion and have that last word with someone for whatever reason. And I think we all go through that, is that we can have that humility to let things kind of die down and let God take charge. Now, you also brought up suffering at the end. You said how she embraced that. And I have one of her quotes. She said, "I know quite well all of you are suffering. I know your anguish and I share it. Oh, if I could but impart to you the peace which Jesus has put into my soul amid my most bitter tears. Be comforted that all will pass away." And she said these words. She said, "When you're tested, repeat, be comforted, all passes away." I think that's important. Now, we're kind of headed toward the end of the podcast, but I would love for you to expand on that, because isn't it true that even the worst suffering we all go through, whatever that is, eventually things pass away? I mean, do I remember 5 years ago, exactly on this day, like what was I upset about? What was hurting me? I mean, maybe if I really think hard about it, I can remember, but I think most of us don't even remember a year ago what were the things on that particular day that we were praying about or what we were worried about. So I didn't know if you wanted to say any words on that.
Well, I think, and sometimes, like, you know, every year changes. You look back, well, for some people, especially at the time of this podcast recording, like some of us are also looking back at the events of the pandemic when there were some inconvenient things that have happened, whether it be mask wearing, this or that, so on and so forth. But I feel like I feel like some people look back at it and realize there's probably something deeper, for that. But I want to steer away from that moment, because I don't think too many people want to talk about that. But I also think, if there's another thing I can add to this, is that in life, we look back at things, especially the moments that gave us joy, the moments that brought about great sorrow, and the moments where there were lessons that had to be learned. Sometimes we have to stop and think, how was God present? When you say, let's say something happened today, and you look back at it, let's say like a year from now, you just have to wonder, like, what could have been? How could I have been a better person? How could I have done it differently? You just learn from that mistake and you just move on. That's easier said than done. For married couples, every year you celebrate an anniversary. And you have to look at what has, but let's keep in mind too, married couples don't stop dating. They keep dating and while they're married. And they stay true to each other. And they make a promise to be true to each other until death do they part. And over the years, they're going to be sought for advice from young couples who are getting ready to get married. And I'm sure, Anne, you can relate to this, with with your daughter and your son-in-law when they were preparing to celebrate their love for each other for the rest of their lives, of course. That's how I see weddings. That's done right. And then they always look back, they look back at every married couple is still on a journey. But the one thing that stands out the most is that they're willing to recommit every year to love each other until death do they part. Now, for other people, for others, they look back at other things like the anniversary of when they lost a very close relative or a friend. They think about the great times they've had with them, the lessons, the words of wisdom, and they carry it on with them to pass on to others. We all have a story to share, good or bad. It must be told. For Saint Therese, she had a story that has been shared with others. She had a story that resonates with us today. She gave us the little way, the simple things we can do to strive for sainthood now. So, for those of us listening, if you have a story about your faith journey, tell it. Do not be afraid to inspire others to find the little way for them to obtain sainthood now.
Beautiful, Mickey. Thank you for all your wonderful reflections. And I know you have always been a fan of this saint. So it's a joy to have this podcast. I was very excited about the topic. Everything that you said just now was true. We all have a vocation, and that vocation to married life, priest, religious, whatever it is, I mean, that's our call to service in our lives. And the way that we do that is through love, right? Just like you said. So I think this has been a wonderful topic. I want to make one more shout out to our audience and just tell you that we care. And you can make an appointment with us for a free pastoral consultation with a Mercedarian friar. That's what we offer. And you can go to nonnatus.org to the priestly consult dropdown, or you can even get spiritual direction, which is free. Not everybody offers that for free, by the way. So we thank you so much for being a part of our ministry. We really care for you. We pray for you every day, all of you. And remember that you can intercede to St. Therese of Lisieux. Join us for our last podcast in this particular series next month. Mickey, any final words?
All I can say, and this is to quote Saint Therese, and I think this would be appropriate to, I think it's, that quote is, I can nourish myself on nothing but truth.
Amen. Amen. Thank you again, Mickey. This has been a wonderful podcast, and we will see all of you here next month for the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith 10 Saint Series. God bless.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com.
People who have faith in the shroud as the burial cloth of Christ, but don't understand or don't know the science, when they get to know it and learn it, have more respect for the cloth because of that. Science truly followed and faith well followed blend to form the truth, and the truth is on that cloth.
One possibility, of course, is that we have some unknown man who was scourged, crucified, stabbed with a lance, crowned with thorns, who spent less than 3 days within his burial shroud and bears his image in such a way that it cannot be recreated with all the technology that exists today, or perhaps, just perhaps, it may be Jesus the Christ.
This is your salvation. This is love in action.